Hey guys, it's Vanessa from Unmasked. Let's talk about some new information I recently got from Latah County. If you've been following my coverage on Idaho 4, you probably know that I've long suspected Bryan Kohbberger could be responsible for the murder of Buddy the dog. And yes, I say murder because Buddy's owners themselves have stated in multiple interviews that investigators told them a person, not an animal, was responsible for his death. But before I get into new details, let me give you a quick recap of what happened to Buddy in case you're unfamiliar. I'll also link some articles if you want to dive deeper. Buddy was a 12-year-old Australian Shepherd who belonged to Pam and Jim Colbert. In 2022, they lived on 10 acres of land in a quiet rural area on Orchard Road in Moscow, Idaho, just a 10-minute drive from the King Road house where the Idaho 4 murders took place. On the night of October 21st, 2022, just 23 days before the homicides, the Colberts went through their usual nightly routine and let Buddy outside before bed. They had lived there for nearly 40 years and had never felt the need to lock their doors. The next morning, Buddy was missing. The Colberts and their neighbors searched the area, and what they found was beyond horrific. Buddy had been skinned, with only the fur on his head and his paws remaining. His body had also been filleted on one side. His collar had been removed and placed nearby, almost as if it was on display. The killer took Buddy's pelt from the scene, and it has never been found. And that wasn't the only strange event that night. The Colberts' neighbor recalled that their own dog was so anxious that night that it shredded its bed into pieces. That same neighbor had posted that just days earlier, their cat had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. In addition to that, just 2 weeks before Buddy's death in the beginning of October, Jim Colbert found a rabbit's remains, scalped and skinned in a way eerily similar to Buddy. In an interview with the Daily Mail, the Colberts described Buddy as being, quote, cut like you would fillet a fish, end quote. As an interesting side note, many of us know Bryan Kohbberger once worked as a fish cutter. His former boss said in an interview that Bryan was bad at the job and had trouble interacting with customers, refusing to make eye contact or even be polite. I've always wondered if investigators checked Bryan's phone data to see if he was near Orchard Road on the morning of October 21st. I know they had much bigger priorities at that time, but something like this could be huge at trial. I also decided to take a closer look at what was happening in Bryan's life around that time. We know from his termination letter that was acquired by multiple news agencies that he was having serious issues at Washington State University that fall. The termination letter reportedly cites that on October 3rd, his professors had a meeting with him about, quote, professional behavior. On October 21st, the same day that Buddy was killed, Bryan received an email about his failure to meet expectations as a TA. So we have a pattern. Bryan was under pressure at WSU, and at the same time, animals in the area were being skinned with a knife and disappearing. If you follow true crime, you know that a lot of times there's a triggering event in someone's life before they begin killing, and many times they start with animals. I wonder if the stress of Bryan failing as a TA and potentially losing any tuition scholarships finally pushed him over the edge. If he knew he was on borrowed time at WSU, could he have escalated thinking he might have to leave and this was his one chance to commit the murders? I guess we'll have to wait until trial to see if there's anything to that. So here's my new information and where it gets a bit strange. Not long after Bryan's arrest, I tried to get the police report on Buddy's murder, but at that time, I was told that it was still an active investigation and that it couldn't be released to the public. So fast forward 2 years, I still couldn't shake what happened to Buddy and if it could possibly be related. So last week, I decided to request the full report again. I called both Moscow PD and Latah County, thinking that enough time had passed, so it should be public by now. But this time, the response was different. First, I noted that they asked me if I was asking for this report because of the homicides that occurred, and I told them yes. They informed me that the investigation into Buddy's death was closed, but that I could not have the report because it's being withheld from the public at this time. When I kept pressing them on it, they said that it was being held by the prosecutor's office for the foreseeable future. When I asked when it would be available and kept pressing for a specific date, they said when prosecution is over. And I couldn't really get any additional details other than that. This is what I find so strange. Why would a police report about a murdered dog killed 2.5 years ago and 3 miles from the Idaho 4 house be withheld by the prosecutor's office for trial? What trial? We've never heard a follow-up on Betty's case. There's been no news of an arrest, and you'd think that we would, given how much fear and speculation there was about a possible connection to the Idaho 4 murders. Now, before I get a bunch of comments saying, but the sheriff's office said there was no connection, yes, I am aware that that was reported. Does that mean I believe that without question? Absolutely not. Here's why. There's an article dated November 21st from the New York Post that says that locals were afraid and in fear that there was a connection between Buddy's murder and the Idaho 4 homicides. Then, the very next day, on November 22nd, 2022, Newsweek published an article that said that the police in Idaho now said that there was no connection. If you'll recall how it was back then, everyone was terrified, and rightfully so, over the homicides that had just occurred. And then when it came out that animals had been skinned nearby, a lot of people were really scared that there was some psychopathic serial killer on the loose, which, in my opinion, there was. I personally believe that the police said that just to kind of quash the panic and calm everyone's fears, because back on November 22nd of 2022, they had no clue who had committed the homicides. And when I called in January 2023, 2 months later for Buddy's report, I was told at that time they were still actively investigating that case. So I think it's pretty clear what my opinion or suspicion is around this, but I want to hear from you. Do you think they're withholding this report because they have found a connection to Bryan and it's being used at his trial? Or do you think there's another explanation? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Due to the nature of my content, many of my videos aren't eligible for monetization. If you'd like to support my channel so I can continue bringing you new videos, please consider joining my Patreon. I go live every Wednesday for True Crime and Wine Wednesdays, where we do exclusive interviews, talk about true crime cases, and many other things. The link is in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and see you next video.